Thank you. You get to have me twice, so you don't even have to pay extra. So I was reminiscing today as I was sitting here in the audience, and I have to say something first. Someone asked me today what I thought was the highlight for me, and I'll tell you what the highlight is. Just listening to really, really smart, good people talk about these issues has been inspirational to me. I'm not sure I've ever been to a more reflective. Yeah, so congratulations on the organizers and everybody else. I've taken a lot from this. Um, I used to practice, when I first got out of law school, I practiced law across the street at an old law firm that used to be a marquee law firm here in Salt Lake City, Vancott, Bagley, Cornwall, and McCarthy. The law firm got its start when the Brigham Young estate was litigated. And even one lawyer from the law firm was on the Supreme Court during Roosevelt administration and was partially responsible for Roosevelt deciding to pack the court because he was objected to every New Deal program that was out there. Anyway, so I was sitting in my office on an afternoon, and I distinctly remember this. And I had gone in-house counsel and had come back to the law firm a couple of times and was working on some international projects, and I just was done. And I thought, I got to figure out something else to do. And I started researching and came, not AI at that time, and came across an article in the Harvard Business Review on the future of food. Now, it so happened that I had grown up working, I did not grow up in Utah, but I had grown up working on my grandfather's farm in Centerville, Bountiful. I would spend the summers there, and farming was really hard work. And then I also moved there when I was in high school for a little while. My father was a produce broker in Los Angeles and in Seattle, where I grew up. And so food was a part of my DNA, although I was a really bad farm worker. And I liked books too much, and my grandmother was always encouraging me to leave, probably to save my life and everyone else's lives around me. But at any rate, it caught my interest, this article. And it's ironic that I'm here today now talking about AI, because that article got me interested in food and thinking about food systems in a way that I had never thought about before. And to make a long story short, I ended up teaching law at the University of Arkansas, where Bill and Hillary Clinton used to teach. And I taught a food law class. It was the first class to have been taught in the country on food law and policy. And I just returned 2 weeks ago from Harvard Law School, where we co-hosted a food law conference for students. We had, that's not me, is it? My phone always rings at the inopportune time. We had a conference for students, and we had 120 students from 70 different law schools there. And so this growth of food and law has just been tremendous. And I think it's interesting because the juxtaposition between food, which is something real and tangible, although not always, and technology, I think, is fascinating, especially AI technology. I do have to say, as I've listened to a lot of educators today talk about students and AI, this has been a topic of great conversation and contestation in faculty meetings over the last couple of years. And I really don't know quite where we're going in law schools with respect to AI and grading and writing papers and so forth. But the one thing I'm going to do different starting this next semester, and I've actually talked to my students about this, is that when I grade papers, I'm actually going to have part of the grade reflected in an oral examination in my office, the old Cambridge-Oxford style. And it's interesting because I told the students that, I asked the students, and they said, we'd love it. Because they're worried, in law school, as you know, you're graded on a curve. And so it's very competitive, and you're always worried that person's going to get the extra edge by cheating through AI. So I think that's going to be an interesting exercise. And we'll see how it goes. So how technology can serve human dignity at the global table. So my focus has really been the last handful of years is on international food law. Now the question is, what is food law? Food law involves safety, how we produce food, labeling, the trade of food, intellectual property. It's really a multi-doctrinal approach to food. We focus on, like for example, in California, there's over 100 class action lawsuits today on food labeling. And we focus on safety, we focus on nutrition programs and so forth. So it's a very interesting field. The students are, I used to worry that the students would lose interest, but it doesn't seem to be that way. Our waiting list for our classes is just way too long. But I've been involved internationally. I've written a couple books on international food law. And as mentioned in the introduction, we have a partnership with the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome. I have to be over there several times a year. I know it's a tough gig, but I force myself to go. But I've been increasingly interested, and I was so thrilled about the timing of this conference and the invitation to speak. I have been very, very focused because of a book I'm writing on the history of the FAO Constitution, which has led me to this interest in the moral framework for global food. And as I've traveled around the world, I'm working on a project right now in Ethiopia, and I realize the levels of malnutrition and hunger in the world today. This is a very serious topic. So aligning law, technology, and human dignity has been a part of my study. And this history of the Constitution is fascinating to me. I've been in the archives in Rome reading on, when World War II was coming to a conclusion, the recognition of the global hunger and malnutrition was remarkable. More people, according to a recent book, died of hunger and malnutrition than they did in the war. And so there was this gathering of interest about food and agriculture because of this massive suffering and also the massive inefficiencies in government. If you remember from your history class, we were pouring milk down the drain. We were getting rid of food. We didn't know how to distribute food very fairly or wisely. So it raised this core question: what is the relationship of government to people regarding food? Who creates this moral basis for regulation? And religions became very involved. And what really brought this to a core issue here was the Bengal famine. I would dare say none of us learned about the Bengal famine in school. Millions of people died. Not just hundreds of thousands, millions of people. If you read the journals of the British civil servants who traveled through India at that time, and their journals are just wretched of the absolute suffering of people, children dying on the streets of hunger and so forth. It's awful. And so this image, when it started to leak out into the media, into the press, really brought people together. And there was, in 1943, Franklin D. Roosevelt, well, the idea of the United Nations was already afoot, hadn't been organized yet. He organized 44 nations to gather together in Hot Springs, Maryland, to talk about a world organization around food. Imagine today, 44 countries gathering together to reach a common consensus on a constitution about anything. I mean, that was a remarkable time. These were remarkable people. I love reading the history of these meetings they had. Every meeting started with a prayer, which was fascinating to me. Judge Jones, who was a Court of Appeals judge who had retired, led these meetings, and you had these different nations coming together to pray and to talk. There was a moral framework that was set for these meetings, and it was called the Freedom from Want, which was Franklin D. Roosevelt's one of 4 freedoms that he established that had resonance with countries all around the world. And they came up with this constitution, which is the subject of a publication I'm writing, which had a moral and a technical charter. Now, I'm going to give you the long story, very short version, because we want to move on to AI and what this means in today's world. But essentially, the development of this Constitution took out the language of freedom from want. It lost its moral character, and that's what's interesting to me, and that's what interests me about AI. The organization became, and the Constitution became a technocratic institution. They believed that technology was the answer, not a political or moral solution. And that was interesting. And I can empathize why you would want to remove politics from the mix. I get it. But this overwhelming belief in technology, that it could save the world, was of great interest to me. And it led to other developments years later with the Green Revolution and some of the incredible crop production cycles that we've had in this world. But I can tell you, I study this area a lot. We produce more than enough food. That's never been the issue. The issue is always, how do we distribute the food? How do we get it to people who really need it? Not just food, but healthy food. So this technocratic displacement of moral ends is how I describe it. Now, what's interesting is after this international organization, and by the way, for those of you how many have been to Rome? All right, quite a few. How many of you have seen the FAO? All right, a few have. It's right next to the Circus Maximus outdoor chariot racing park, and right in the ruins. And it's the oldest and largest specialized agency of the United Nations. Anyway, this moral framework in the 1960s and 70s started to develop with the help of religion, with churches. I have a picture up here of Pope John the 23rd. I hope I got my number right. And I just finished reading a biography of him. A fascinating person. He was the first, what you might call, people's pope. I was in Italy during the last election, and that was a marvelous experience as I got to listen to the church bells go off all through the cities of Italy. But this pope, if you watch the movie Conclave, he was the pope who was too big for his robes. If you remember that one short scene. But he was known as the people's pope. He was the first pope to go to the prison and not just give blessings, but to hug people. And he had this huge, humane presence about him. And this pope actually began to work with the FAO, the United Nations, in developing this idea of rights to food, of dignity. And that language was then added back into the Constitution in 1965 by Director General B.J. Sen from India. And so this sort of constitutional approach, we've heard constitutional approaches to AI, which has been fascinating to me today, but the Constitution for food, again, began to encompass this human rights approach. So you begin to see this growth of food aid, government assistance, and church networks in developing, and the World Food Program, which won the Nobel Prize a few years ago, which is also in Rome, split off from FAO, and that was also part of this enterprise. The LDS Church, of course, is certainly part of this network in the delivery of expansive food to areas of need. But this moral conversation about food and hunger was certainly revived during this period, but governance remained fragmented. The world was still not together on these issues. And then since then, there's this paradox that's developed with religion, food, and technology. You have huge technological shifts. Biotechnology. When I first started teaching 20 years ago, all the students wanted to talk about genetically modified food. Is it safe? Should we label it? Is it healthy? Is it going to kill me? You know what? Not a single student's interested in it anymore. It's really fascinating to me. And I've asked myself why, and I think a lot of it had to do with COVID, students becoming very wary of anti-science sentiment, but they're just not that interested. They're interested in different kinds of issues. But technology has always been, and AI now is really, really talked a lot about in food circles, as you might imagine. Applications include crop modeling, supply chain automation, personalized diets. I mean, there's a great deal of talk about each of us having a personalized diet based on our ethnicity, our DNA, and so forth. But we still have persistent hunger, malnutrition. I haven't seen a technology yet who has solved these problems. So, and then recently, U.S. aid closure, which was, in my mind, very problematic, as I had worked on a number of projects. Problematic, not in a political way, but problematic in the sense of how are we going to fill the gap? Because these programs did a lot of good, and there's a lot of need. So the question is, with all of these AI applications, and they are remarkable applications, is our capacity to care equal to our capacity to compute? And that's when I come to thinking about AI and food and law and governance. And this is not abstract. Those of us who have lived in the West, really, we don't experience hunger. But it's important to know that for other people around the world, this is a daily issue. So some of the concepts that I have thought about include making sure that and I'm thinking also in terms of the role of church, not just the LDS church, but churches. Aligning AI's power with compassion and justice. One that I think is actually really important and powerful, and it doesn't sound exciting, but I think it's really, really important, is aligning investment funds for what I call ethical agritech. What do I mean by that? There's a lot of investment interest in food and agriculture right now. I attended a meeting in New York City last year where the biggest banks and investment companies were all there. What are they interested in? They're interested in land, mostly. There is a huge amount of what we call land grabbing that's going on, where the biggest farmers in this world now are the multi-billionaires. There's even concern that there's a lot of Russian oligarchs who own farmland in different parts of the world that it's really hard to trace. Governments are buying farmland. China owns a ton of land in Africa right now to farm. There are many, this is a land grabbing problem that's reaching really serious proportions as a problem. That's not the kind of investment we need. We need investment in warehouses, roads, small farms, schools where we can actually have school meals for children and so on and so forth, mostly in the global south. And so this sort of alignment, it seems to me, for churches is not just to give food aid, but to give food development resources to help train and help develop. Most of the farming, for example, in this world in global south is done by women. But the checks, the money from the government go to the men, and that's a problem. And so there's all kinds of barriers to equity, to real life issues that go on. And it seems to me this is something that churches and people with thinking about ethics and large foundations. I'm working with the Gates Foundation in Africa on a really interesting project that involves this kind of thinking. And that's the sort of thing I think we have to do. And AI can help in so many ways. AI can help with certification standards for digitally centered agriculture. Certification is a way to test the authenticity of food and claims, and making sure that we eliminate child labor, that we eliminate slavery, that go into a number of the food products that we eat. Also, cooperative data sharing infrastructures. I think this is a great idea. What a wonderful opportunity for churches and for other. entities, foundations to think about. Information is power, has been said over and over today. Many of these small farmers have information that's being gobbled up by large corporations as we speak. But organizing small farms into cooperatives and creating databases and allowing people to actually use the information to their own advantage or to sell it would be very helpful. Storytelling and transparency to rehumanize food systems. The stories that small farms could tell. My stepfather is from Peru, and I used to travel. He and my mother lived there for many years, and my family and I used to travel to Ica, Peru, and I would stay on this the world's largest asparagus farm. And the question that I got from the farm workers every year was the same question: what is Thanksgiving? Because that's the day when all the workers had to go to the farm and work and harvest the asparagus that would go to Europe and to the United States. Compelling stories about our food that AI can help assist. The role of religion and ethics in framing technology with a purpose. A really cool project I'll share with you that we're doing in Africa, and then I'll close. There's a very large law firm called White & Case. It's one of the largest law firms in the world. Have approached us in developing a pro bono project where we can actually take a food law curriculum and teach it in different countries in Africa, where we can actually train and help mobilize young people to think about how to create these infrastructures that will provide equity and stop land grabbing and help develop resources and ways of actually producing food. So this is a project I'm very excited about. And these are the sorts of things that I think can be done in a practical way by churches, by universities, by all of us. We all can have an opinion on AI, and I guess I do too, and I have lots of interesting thoughts about it. But there are practical things that we can do in mobilizing AI, and we intend to use it in developing this curriculum in ways that we can really mobilize and share it in a broader way than we would otherwise. So my last comment, a quote that I've made: the future of feeding the world depends not only on what we grow, but on what we teach. And so I think that I'm so happy to be numbered amongst all of you, and I've taken a lot of your words and your advice and your perspectives to heart as we continue to try to make a difference. Thank you.